Good evening and welcome to Crossroads. It's possible that in the very near future, you will no longer have the freedom to choose what kind of car you want to drive, and this change might cost you more than even just the freedom of choice. The Biden administration has been pushing people to switch from traditional fossil-fueled vehicles to electric vehicles, regardless of whether people actually want to make that change. Back in 2021, Biden introduced new emission standards in a push to make 50% of passenger cars in the U.S. electric by 2030. That means they're finding ways to make you switch. And it's possible people might just have to, whether they want to do it or not. Watch.
Folks, the rest of the world is moving ahead. We've just got to step up. Government, labor, and industry working together, which you're seeing here today. We have a playbook and it's going to work. Today, I'm announcing steps we're taking to set a new pace for electric vehicles. Importantly, we have announcements today from automakers representing nearly the entire auto industry market who have positioned around the ambition of 40 to 50% of all vehicles sold by 2030 in America being electric. You know, that's why today I'm signing an executive order setting out a target of 50% of all passenger vehicles sold by 2030 will be electric and set in motion an all-out effort.
And then earlier this year, the White House announced that the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, they proposed even more aggressive rules in their push for electric vehicles. They said that these new proposed federal vehicle emission standards will accelerate the ongoing transition to a clean vehicle future and tackle the climate crisis. It added that the proposed standards would improve air quality for communities across the nation, especially communities that have borne the burden of polluted air. Now, if these rules go as planned, 67% of new cars could be electric by 2032, according to White House projections at least. They said this: EPA estimates that by 2032, if finalized, the proposed rules could result in electrification of 67% of new sedans, crossovers, SUVs, and light trucks, 50% of new vocational vehicles such as buses and garbage trucks, 35% of new short-haul freight tractors, and 25% of new long-haul freight tractors. Now, some government proposals even aim to remove the option of purchasing a traditional vehicle altogether. The biggest one, where might these be, you might ask? Well, you might guess it, in California.
Of all the simultaneous crises that we face as a state, and I would argue as a nation, and for that matter, from a global perspective, none is more impactful, none is more forceful than the issue of the climate crisis. And that's exactly what we're advancing here today, is a strategy to address that crisis head on, to be as bold as the problem is big. And we'll do that by setting forth a goal, firm goal, that by 2035, in the next 15 years, we will eliminate in the state of California the sales of internal combustion engines. We will move forward to green and decarbonize our vehicle fleet here in the state of California.
Governor Gavin Newsom, he announced this highly ambitious plan in 2020 to have 100%, all of them, car sales be zero emission by 2035. Again, all cars. And this is not just some talk they're having about it. Newsom actually issued an executive order on this. And then in August of 2022, the California Air Resources Board implemented the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule, which codifies Newsom's plan. They established a year-by-year roadmap to realize their goal of 100%, every single one of them, of new cars and light trucks sold in California being zero-emission vehicles. And it's a big goal, of course. Electric vehicles made up just 5.8% of all new car sales in the U.S. last year. Electric vehicles on average still cost much more money than the traditional car. So how will they implement this agenda when people don't want them or can't afford them? And what does it mean for you? Well, you may soon not even have a choice. It's possible your only option is going to be electric, and that's their goal. All of this is in spite of the ironic fact that it's been proven again and again that EVs, electric vehicles, while they don't use fossil fuels on the road, they actually have a considerably high cost during production. Studies show that the EVs take just as much, if not more, oil to produce as traditional vehicles, for example. In all these instances, green energy advocates seem to remain pretty dang silent. No response. It seems like those impacts on the environment are acceptable impacts. The biggest cost is one you might not normally think about. The biggest cost of one of the most essential components of an EV might actually surprise you. It costs a significant amount of our most precious resource, not oil, but water. When mining for the elements that are needed to produce the parts for electric vehicles like lithium, the mining processes actually use up and totally pollute the surrounding water in the land nearby. Now, the process is called dewatering, and it can actually have a huge impact on the areas around the mines. In the United States, this is notably already occurring in some areas like Lander County, Nevada, at the Cortez mine complex. Now, the site is expanding and could have a growing negative impact on the local water supply. This same process, notably, has been seen in Chile, Argentina, Bolivia. In China, mining like this for rare earth minerals is poisoning their water supply. And with lithium, it's a direct part of how the mining operation works. The briny water that fills into the mines where lithium is found is then pumped to the surface, where it just sits there and evaporates so the lithium can be extracted. This is in addition to the fresh water that mining processes take. So the big question is, well, where's the outrage? The drive for production of vehicles that are supposedly going to help the environment is costing us an essential natural resource, one we kind of need to survive. Communities are losing their sources of fresh water. Now, personally, I'd take safe drinking water over an electric vehicle. And while you could argue that we're not currently destroying all of our water supplies, think about the impact if every person with a car was forced to go electric. We're talking damage right now with like just over 5% of vehicles. What about when they need to replace those batteries, which, by the way, start to fade after about maybe 5 or 6 years? Now, the hypocrisy is so clear in the push for green energy. Those in power that advocate for this don't actually seem to care about the cost to the environment, seemingly as long as it accomplishes their goal and fits in with their agenda. The production of lithium batteries has quadrupled over the past 10 years, which means the environmental impact of the increase in mining, it's also increased significantly. Lithium mining uses 500,000 gallons of fresh water per metric ton of lithium extracted. And the impact of this process on the water table, it's not something that just goes away. It doesn't just correct itself quickly. It's estimated that the aquifer in Nevada might not recover for a couple hundred years. So it's depriving a community of its water source for a few hundred years. Is that a good trade-off? Is it actually a cost that EV advocates are willing to pay? They might very well be, because, well, maybe in their eyes it's not their community's water, now is it? Well, stay tuned after the break. There's also a potential national security risk with electric vehicles. We'll talk more about this after the break. Welcome back. The White House has been pushing strongly for electric vehicles despite their noted impacts on the environment. And automakers, of course, have been following suit and building plants in which to make electric vehicles. Ford Motor Company announced earlier this year that they would invest $3.5 billion to build a plant in Michigan. And as part of this development, they'd be working with the contemporary Amperex technology, a China-based firm, to manufacture the battery cells needed for electric vehicles. Now, after the announcement, Republicans and national security experts, they noted the serious problem of teaming up with a Chinese Communist Party-tied firm. Now, this Monday, Ford has announced that they would pause construction on this project. Here to talk with us about what's happening is Kelly Sloan. He's Senior Fellow in Energy and Environment at the Centennial Institute. Hey, Kelly, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm curious, what do you make of Ford pausing the construction of this EV plant?
Well, they were a little opaque as the actual reason in their announcement, but there's a lot of things going into it. I think a lot of it's going to has to do with the recent scrutiny that was given to the project by congressional Republicans who were questioning, if you will, the extent to which the plant was going to be dependent on China, and to the extent at which it was going to benefit China and Chinese workers. There's also, the simple fact of economics. The Ford's in the middle of entering the third week now of the strike, worker strikes by the UAW, which is obviously putting a crimp on their finances, and at the same time they're trying to build up this EV capacity, which doesn't really seem to have the demand behind it. It's still after years of the Tesla has been on the market since I believe 2001. And the EV market is still only penetrated maybe 6%. To try and get to, the Biden administration has got the EPA to put forth a rule they announced last April to ensure that EVs are the supermajority of vehicle sales by 2032. We're not on that trajectory right now. So, I think you're starting to see a lot of corrections being made, a lot of realism starting to hit a lot of the markets of these auto manufacturers and others that were really kind of pushing this, trying to hop on the bandwagon that is just simply unrealistic.
Yeah, on the union workers, it's kind of terrible irony right now. You have these union workers protesting, asking for higher pay, and pretty cushy package actually. Meanwhile, the jobs are being sold off to China, and they've been told about this. I think Trump's been saying, criticizing some of the union leaders, saying, hey, these guys are going to sell your jobs off. Why aren't you protesting that? I'm curious, how does this whole thing fit in with the union protests if the jobs for EVs are going to China?
Well, it is rather ironic that President Biden was standing on the picket line today, or planning to stand on the picket line, while it's his policies that are promoting more EVs. And the more EVs we produce, that's fewer cars are being manufactured in the big three plants. One of the reasons that the auto workers have had to make so many concessions, or say they've had to make concessions to management over the last few years, is because they see it like everybody else. They're writing on the wall that the more EVs that there are being forced onto the market, the fewer vehicles are going to be made. Now, even if it's unrealistic that we're going to meet that demand, we still have these laws in place, like the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which, again, is kind of mandating and pushing the more EVs onto the market. So, yeah, workers are losing their jobs. Most of this manufacture is being done overseas. A great deal of the battery manufacture and the components for these batteries, and like with this new plant, are being done in China. So, yeah, it is rather ironic that the unions are, pushing so hard for more concessions, more pay, and everything, when at the same time they're supporting policies that are forcing their jobs out of existence.
Yeah, well, on the batteries, of course, being made in the Chinese factories, when it comes to electric vehicles, one of the big concerns with safety is the batteries. With the flooding, for example, there were some warnings that, hey, if salt water gets in the battery, it could start a fire. There are some, when you talk about the actual safety concerns, that's usually where it's at. Are there security issues if they start having a CCP-tied company in China making these? Because we do know the standards, let's say, are not exactly up to par with U.S. standards.
Yeah, well, absolutely. There's a security risk, of course, at the individual level in terms of safety. We don't have the Chinese companies, Chinese component manufacturers are not going to have the same regulatory scrutiny that American companies do, or the other Western companies do. In larger sense, of course, you have the security issue with the United States making itself more dependent on China, or a global competitor, for the raw materials needed for what it's making the keystone or the backbone of our economy, not just with EVs, but even with the rest of the whole green infrastructure, solar panels, wind turbines. All of these require minerals that right now China has a lock on it. If I got my numbers right, China has cornered 41% of the supply of cobalt, which is a main contributor, main mineral in the batteries. It's working on making itself, cornering 1/3 of the world's supply of lithium, not just from its domestic supplies, but by investing in mines in places where lithium exists in Central America, South America, Africa, and that type of thing. So yeah, there's a tremendous risk of us kind of negotiating away our national security by making ourselves dependent on our largest global competitor and largest global threat for something that's so critical to our economy by decree.
Well, you hit on a really important point, because we've seen with Russia, one of the big accusations about Russia is that they have, of course, a monopoly on energy for Europe. And because of that, they can use it as a pressure point to, kind of get their way, essentially, diplomatically. We've just seen the Chinese Communist Party come out and say that the move away from fossil fuels is unrealistic. They're not even going to do it. But they have a monopoly on the systems to build, of course, the resources to build all the solar panels and wind turbines and electric vehicle batteries that we're going to make ourselves dependent on. And so are we falling in the United States into the same trap that Europe fell into with Russia? I mean, what does this mean? How does a country exert influence through a monopoly on the energy systems?
Well, I think we're absolutely falling into the same trap. When John Kerry was over in Beijing a couple months ago, begging them for some kind of a green deal, the Chinese are not going to hamstring their economy or risk their growth by abiding by any of the climate agreements that they've already agreed to. They're opening more coal-fired plants. In the meantime, we are willing to put just about anything on the table, and that's always been the question: what will be on the table? We need to secure these supplies of minerals to build this green infrastructure that we're imposing on our economy by decree. And if it's being controlled by a country like China, what are they going to ask for in return? Will they ask for a reduction in arms sales to Taiwan? Will they ask for our Navy to pull back from the West Pacific? Will they ask for Maui? I mean, we just don't know what they're going to put, what kind of demands they're going to put on access to the things we need to build up this economy that the Biden administration wants to pursue. And desperation is not a good negotiating position.
Yeah, pretty wild times. Kelly, thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for tonight. Thank you for joining us. And as always, stay informed and stay free.